All right, how are we doing? In today's video, I'm going to talk about functional threshold power. I'm just going to give some caveats from the very get-go. Today's video is not going to give you a hell of a lot in terms of take-home messaging in things that you can apply or change in your training. In addition, you are probably going to leave this video more confused than when you started. Also, if you haven't seen the first video that I've uploaded on this channel about training zones, and I suggest you watch that first. That'll help get your head around what we're going to talk about today. And just the final point I want to say is I'm going to try and stick exclusively to this study here. We don't have to look very far to see that FTP has been ridiculously studied over the years, and a lot of the results are actually conflicting with each other. So I just want to make that really clear from the start. We're looking at one study. We're not looking at a whole body of research. We're just looking at this one, and results have been conflicting over time. Okay, so FTP, a few things we need to define first. I'm going to go a little bit Steven Seiler on your asses here. And what I mean by that is if you ask Seiler, why is the sky blue? His response straight off the bat would be, well, what even is the color blue? Okay, so let's just talk about the history of the FTP test. So the Katz, Allen, and Kogan that published the book Training and Racing with a Power Meter, they were the ones that formulated the FTP test back in 2006. So FTP is the highest power output a cyclist can maintain in a quasi-steady state for 1 hour. Okay, so that is the original origins of the FTP test. FTP has also been proposed to be used as a surrogate for some well-known performance markers representing maximal oxidative steady state, maximal metabolic steady state, critical power, maximal lactate steady state. That's a big one. Going to talk about that later. And also VO2 max. We're going to talk about VO2 max later because that's a big one. I just want to go a little bit more into the definitions of Allen and Kogan's FTP. So predictor of VO2 max. VO2 max is strongly correlated with, so this is from Kogan's book. VO2 max is strongly correlated with aerobic capacity and endurance performance. No, watch my last video. It's not. Lactate threshold is closely related to FTP. By the end of this video, you're going to say, no, it's not. So just a few points there. Okay, so let's go down and work out what this study did and why I'm probably a little bit more passionate about this than what I should be, or even a little bit more confused than I should be. So the present study aimed to investigate the validity of FTP being a threshold separating the heavy and severe intensity domains by examining the physiological response when exercising at FTP of 15 watts above. Okay, so this is why I said go watch my first video. Let's just have a quick recap. Training zones. There are many different models of training zones promoted. In my mind, the only one that has validity is a 3-zone model. And the reason I say that is because the 3-zone model is actually tied back to physiological delineations. So zone 1, moderate intensity. So this is our low intensity, moderate intensity. This is the one that's kind of famous at the moment because everybody's talking about training below that lactate threshold 1. Zone 2 is the high intensity domain. So that's between lactate thresholds 1 and 2. And then lactate threshold 2 and above, that's our severe or our zone 3. So this is where lactate is now increasing at a rate that it cannot be cleared from the body. These terms get thrown around interchangeably and it does get confusing, and I apologize, and I'll try and keep it as straight down the line as I can. So just having a look at the population here, VO2s in the high 50s, low 60s. Some of them were trained, some of them weren't. They were nothing special. That cohort of people may also be relevant to the findings of this test. Some of the conflicting findings in the other literature is probably more related to cohort. Anyway, what do they do in this test? So first they did a ramp incremental test for VO2 max. I want to make something very clear. This was a VO2 max test. This was not the trainer road or the Zwift ramp test. This was a specific test to get VO2 max. There are similarities between the test, and when I do my VO2 max, I actually just use the trainer road ramp test. It gets you to the same spot, but there are differences. They then did a 20-minute maximal effort time trial, which was the FTP test. They also did a test at 15 watts above FTP as well, which is fascinating, and we'll get into that for reasons in a little bit. So coming down to the results, the mean power output was 220 watts plus or minus 50. So like I said, these guys weren't particularly well-trained cyclists in any stretch of the imagination. An FTP of 220 watts will not get you on the podium in a D-grade club race. Ask me how I know. Further into the results, the highest VO2 max achieved during both intensities was significantly lower than that was recorded in the specific VO2 max test. So what they're saying here is while doing the FTP test, they did not achieve VO2 max. So the first thing we can hit on the head right there is the FTP test a predictor of VO2 max? No, it's not. The second thing that we're going to talk about here, looking at the black dots here. Okay, so down the bottom, we have the duration of the FTP test. Over here, we have lactate, so pretty straightforward stuff. I think we've all seen graphs like this before. We can see here from the first black dot to the fourth black dot that lactate is increasing throughout the test. So basically what this is saying is because lactate was increasing, we are above our maximal lactate steady state. So we cannot use this test to predict what would be this LT2 inflection point between zone 2 and zone 3. And the importance of that we will get to in a minute as well. 46% of the participants couldn't hold their 20-minute power for 40 minutes or whatever it was. 95% of their 20-minute power for 40 minutes. So the idea that you can take a percentage of your 20-minute power and hold it for an hour is just nonsense. It's not going to happen. There was another study published a couple of weeks ago that called it out. It's just not going to happen. Now, why is all this important? Well, as I mentioned, Trainer Road are probably the worst for this, and Zwift are probably equally bad as well. And just, I think having a look through Training Peaks as well, there's a lot of coaches in inverted commas that do this really badly as well. Using the results of an FTP test doesn't delineate training zones. So, for example, Allen and Kogan suggested that 106% of FTP would train VO2 max. No. According to these results, no, it just doesn't. And then to say that training at 90% of FTP would equate to LT2, no, it just doesn't. So we can't make predictions on delineations of training zones from an FTP test. So you can probably start to see why the results of an FTP test are progressively becoming more and more like a dick measuring contest with less validity to actually making informed decisions about our training. Okay, it's a poor predictor of time trial performance. It doesn't predict our training zones. What it does do is it tells us what our 20-minute power is, and that may or may not be important to you. Now, I said this video would leave you with more questions than answers, and that's probably the story of my life and the story of being an academic. So if we can't get our training zones from FTP, how do we get them? Well, we can, to a certain degree, get them from a critical power test. Critical power in itself is a whole different video, and I'm just going to leave this video with that. I'm not going to go into critical power today. Thank you very much for hanging around. I realize this is a pretty hard going subject, and there's not a lot of take home from this. And I know a few of you commented you wanted more take home, but I apologize. This was a study that landed on my desk during the week and I wanted to talk about it. Forgive me for saying this again. I know it's tacky and cliche and clickbaity, but please click the like button. Please click subscribe, and please share this content with your friends, whether you're watching it on Instagram or YouTube. It really helps me get this stuff out there, and it's really the internal discovery on both these platforms at the moment for new content creators is rubbish. It's horrible. So thank you for watching. Please share it with your friends. I just said that, and I'll catch you next time. Safe training. See ya. Peace.